The scream ripped through the white hospital corridor like shattered glass, sharp and impossible to ignore, the sound of a child collapsing under pain that had been silent for too long. The man in the black suit froze mid-step, his power evaporating in a heartbeat as his daughter's small hands clutched her back and her knees buckled beneath her pink dress. His name was Rafe Calderon, a man whose reputation ruled the city's underworld with fear and whispered obedience. By noon each day, his phone usually buzzed with tributes, threats, and quiet confirmations of loyalty. But this afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall hospital windows, bleaching the corridor in an unforgiving glow, and Rafe stood helpless as 8-year-old Arya trembled against his leg, her face twisted in agony she could no longer hide. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and clean lies, the kind that promised safety but never told the whole truth. Nurses moved quickly, machines hummed softly, and somewhere down the hall footsteps echoed with an urgency that did not yet match the terror spreading through Rafe's chest. This is where the story grips your heart, and before it pulls you deeper, the creators at Pure Kindness want to ask something simple. If you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. Rafe had clawed his way out of a childhood shaped by hunger and fists, raised in back rooms and alleyways where pain was currency and mercy was weakness. He built an empire from fear because fear had once been the only thing that kept him alive. When Arya was born, tiny and red-faced in a sunlit private clinic, he promised she would never know the world he came from. Her mother died 2 years later from an illness that moved faster than money could stop, and Rafe buried his grief beneath work, delegating Arya's care to nannies, tutors, and drivers while convincing himself that protection meant distance. He watched her grow through security feeds and carefully scheduled dinners, believing his shadow alone could keep her safe. Now that belief began to rot. A nurse ushered them into a private room flooded with daylight, its pale blue walls almost too gentle for what was unfolding. Arya sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, tears slipping down her cheeks in quiet surrender. Rafe knelt in front of her, his expensive suit creasing against the tile, his hands shaking as he brushed damp hair from her forehead. She had complained for weeks about her back hurting, always in passing, always brushed aside with promises of rest and gifts meant to distract. Today the pain had finally screamed loud enough to break through his armor. The doctor asked Rafe to help lift Arya's dress so they could examine her back. His fingers hesitated, dread blooming in his gut like poison. When he carefully raised the fabric, the world seemed to stop breathing. Bruises layered over bruises, some yellowed with age, others dark and fresh, crisscrossed her small back like a map of cruelty. Thin marks traced lines of discipline that had nothing to do with care, and Rafe's vision blurred as the truth struck him with a force no bullet ever had. This was not an accident. This was not a fall or a clumsy childhood mishap. This was betrayal. His mind reeled backward through memories he had ignored. Arya flinching when certain caregivers entered the room. Her sudden silence at dinner. The way she slept curled inward, protecting herself even in dreams. Rafe's hands clenched until his knuckles burned, the room spinning as the weight of his failure crashed down on him. He had built walls against enemies he could see, never suspecting the danger had been invited inside under the guise of trust. Police officers appeared in the doorway, their presence both reassuring and damning. Rafe barely registered them as the doctor spoke softly, explaining procedures and mandatory reports. The nurse held Arya close, shielding her from the storm of adult consequences gathering in the air. Outside, sunlight continued to pour through the windows, indifferent and bright, illuminating every crack in the illusion Rafe had lived in. As the hours stretched on, the hospital became a maze of quiet conversations and paperwork. Rafe sat alone by the window, watching dust dance in the light, replaying every choice that led here. Power had given him control over cities, but it had robbed him of the one thing that mattered. He realized then that violence had taught him how to destroy, not how to protect. The empire he built could burn for all he cared, if it meant Arya could heal. Investigations moved swiftly. The caregiver responsible was arrested before sunset, escorted past Rafe without a glance, their fear palpable yet meaningless compared to the damage done. Rafe felt no satisfaction, only a hollow ache and a resolve forming slowly, painfully, like bone knitting after a break. He spent the night in the hospital chair beside Aria's bed, watching her breathe, counting each rise and fall as if it were a promise he could still keep. Days turned into weeks. Daytime therapy sessions filled sunlit rooms with cautious laughter and tears. Aria learned to speak her pain out loud, her small voice gaining strength as counselors guided her through feelings no child should have to name. Rafe attended every session, his presence steady, his phone permanently silent. He sold businesses, severed ties, and dismantled parts of his organization piece by piece, choosing a quieter life that allowed him to be present. The city whispered about his disappearance, but for the first time, he did not care. Healing was not linear. There were mornings when Aria woke screaming, her body remembering what her mind tried to forget. Rafe held her through those moments, absorbing her fear without trying to fix it, learning that love sometimes meant standing still inside the storm. In the afternoons, sunlight filtered through the windows of their new apartment, a modest place far from the old compounds, and they painted together, colors bleeding into one another, creating something imperfect and honest. Near the end of this journey, if this story has touched your heart, the team at Pure Kindness asks for your support. Like, share, and subscribe to help spread messages of healing and compassion to others who may need them. On one quiet day, months later, Aria stood taller, her back straight, scars fading into pale reminders of survival rather than shame. She laughed as she ran through a park drenched in golden daylight, her joy tentative but real. Rafe watched from a bench, tears slipping freely now, unashamed. He understood that redemption was not earned through grand gestures, but through showing up, again and again, even when it hurt. Before this story closes, take a moment to comment and share what it made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass, Rafe felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. He had been a king of fear, but now he was simply a father learning to be gentle. Aria ran back to him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and in that embrace was the quiet truth that love, once chosen, could break cycles even the darkest past could not hold forever.